When a self-appointed HOA enforcer calls the cops on a black woman at her own community pool, she's in for a jaw-dropping lesson in humility and power. It was a typical sunny afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates, where pristine lawns stretched endlessly under the summer sky. The Homeowners Association, HOA, had strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to pool hours, ensuring that this gated community remained an oasis of order and uniformity. But today's tranquility would be shattered by an incident at the community pool, a confrontation between two very different women. Karen Thompson, a middle-aged white woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a clipboard permanently glued to her side, prided herself on upholding the HOA's standards. She saw it as her personal mission to keep things just right. Today, however, Karen noticed something amiss while walking past the pool area. A black woman she didn't recognize lounged casually by the water, sipping lemonade and scrolling through her phone. Her presence seemed off. To Karen, who knew everyone in the development, all thought she did. This stranger represented a disruption to the carefully curated harmony of the neighborhood. Without hesitation, Karen approached the woman with her usual air of authority. "Excuse me," she said sharply, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. "Are you aware that this is a private community pool? I don't see your name on our resident list." The woman looked up calmly, but didn't respond immediately. Karen took this silence as confirmation of guilt. "If you're not a member here, I'll need to ask you to leave," Karen continued, crossing her arms over her chest. It was then that the other woman finally spoke, her voice steady and composed. "I live in this community," she replied simply, holding Karen's gaze without flinching. Karen wasn't convinced. How could someone like her a black woman dressed in casual swimwear, belong to such an exclusive community? Surely there must have been some mistake. Determined to assert her dominance, Karen pressed further. "Well, if you're a resident, show me proof," she demanded, her tone dripping with skepticism. "We can't just let anyone waltz in here." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Karen's aggressive demeanor. "I'm sorry," she said coolly, "but I don't carry my homeowner documents around when I come to relax at my own pool." This answer only fueled Karen's indignation. In her mind, this refusal to comply confirmed her suspicions. "I don't think you understand how serious this is," Karen snapped, pulling out her phone. "If you won't cooperate, I'll have no choice but to call the police." And just like that, Karen dialed 911, reporting a trespasser at the Willow Creek Estates pool. As she relayed the details to the dispatcher, the woman sat quietly, shaking her head slightly, as though she'd seen this kind of behavior before and found it both predictable and tiresome. Meanwhile, neighbors began gathering curiously around the scene. Some recognized the black woman. They'd seen her jogging or gardening in the mornings, but most stayed silent, unwilling to intervene. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what was happening. Karen basked in the attention, feeling vindicated in her actions. After all, she was protecting the integrity of their community, or so she believed. Within minutes of Karen's call to 911, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the otherwise tranquil atmosphere of Willow Creek Estates. The sound sent a ripple of anticipation through the small crowd that had gathered around the pool area. Neighbors exchanged nervous glances, some stepping back to avoid being too close to the unfolding drama, while others leaned in slightly, eager not to miss a single detail. By now, whispers about what was happening had spread like wildfire throughout the community. Speculation ran rampant. Was this woman really a trespasser? Or was Karen overreacting yet again? As the police cruiser pulled into the parking lot adjacent to the pool, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the manicured hedges and pristine sidewalks, all eyes turned toward the vehicle. Two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp and their expressions neutral, as they assessed the situation. Both projected an air of calm authority, though it was clear from their body language that they were prepared for anything. Their arrival added a layer of gravity to the scene, transforming what might have been dismissed as a petty neighborhood squabble into something far more serious. Karen wasted no time seizing the moment. With a triumphant gleam in her eye, she marched up to the officers, clipboard still clutched tightly in her hand, as if it were a badge of office. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice tinged with smug satisfaction. "That's her," she continued, pointing dramatically at the black woman seated by the pool. Her tone carried a mix of indignation and righteousness, as though she were presenting evidence in a courtroom. "She refuses to prove she lives here, and she's clearly violating HOA regulations. I've already asked her multiple times to leave, but she won't cooperate." The officers nodded politely, maintaining their professional demeanor despite Karen's theatrics. One of them, a tall man with sharp features and a measured stride, approached the accused trespasser. He crouched down slightly so he could speak to her at eye level, his posture non-threatening but firm. "Ma'am," he began, his voice steady and respectful, "could you please confirm your identity for us?" The woman, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the entire ordeal, didn't hesitate. She reached into her tote bag, which rested beside her lounge chair, and retrieved her driver's license. Handing it to the officer, she introduced herself with quiet confidence. "My name is Senator Andrea Carter. I represent District 12 in the state legislature. And yes, I do live here." The effect of her words was immediate and palpable. The first officer froze mid-motion, his eyes widening slightly as he processed the information. His partner, standing nearby, visibly stiffened before exchanging a quick glance with him. They recognized the name instantly. Senator Carter was a prominent figure in the region, known for her tireless advocacy on issues ranging from racial justice to affordable housing. Her presence in this suburban enclave wasn't just unexpected. It was almost surreal. For Karen, however, the revelation landed like a thunderclap. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as she struggled to process what she just heard. The clipboard slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud on the concrete patio. Time seemed to slow down as reality crashed into her self-righteous certainty. This wasn't just any resident she'd accused of trespassing. It was a state senator, a powerful public official whose work often put her at odds with people like Karen, individuals who clung fiercely to notions of exclusivity and control. The officers quickly pivoted, their tone shifting from investigative to apologetic. "Senator Carter, we're very sorry for the inconvenience," the first officer said, handing back her ID with a deferential nod. "This appears to be a misunderstanding, and we'll make sure everything is resolved promptly." His partner echoed the sentiment, adding, "If there's anything else we can do to assist you, please let us know." Meanwhile, Karen stood frozen, her earlier bravado evaporating entirely. She looked around desperately, seeking support or validation from the onlookers, but found none. Instead, she was met with a mixture of disbelief, disapproval, and outright hostility. Some neighbors shook their heads in disgust, muttering under their breath about how embarrassing the situation had become. Others simply stared at her, their expressions unreadable but heavy with judgment. It was as though the tide had turned completely against her, leaving her stranded and exposed. Senator Carter rose gracefully from her seat, brushing off imaginary dust from her swimsuit, as though reclaiming her dignity after the unnecessary intrusion. Her movements were deliberate, exuding a quiet strength that commanded attention. Addressing both the officers and the growing audience of neighbors, she spoke with poise and clarity. "Let me make one thing clear," she began, her voice carrying across the pool area without ever needing to rise above a conversational tone. "No one should ever feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own home because of the color of their skin. What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about the systemic biases and assumptions that still exist in communities like this one. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with those who listened. For many, they struck a nerve, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, prejudice, and the ways in which such attitudes manifest in everyday life. Even the officers nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the validity of her point. Karen, however, couldn't bear the weight of the senator's gaze. Stammering, she attempted to salvage whatever scraps of dignity she could muster. I was just doing my job," she protested weakly, her voice trembling. "You didn't provide any proof earlier, so I assumed." "You assumed wrong," Senator Carter interrupted, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. There was no malice in her tone, only a steely resolve that left no room for argument. "And your assumptions caused harm. That's something we all need to reflect on, not just here, but across the country." With that, she collected her belongings, including her phone and sunglasses, and walked away with the kind of effortless grace that left everyone watching in stunned silence. The officers lingered briefly to ensure the situation wouldn't escalate further, offering polite farewells to the remaining residents before departing themselves. As their cruiser pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, though the energy of the moment lingered long after the physical confrontation had ended. For Karen, the aftermath was devastating. Word of the incident spread rapidly, thanks in part to social media posts shared by several neighbors who had witnessed the spectacle firsthand. Photos of Karen pointing accusingly at Senator Carter circulated online alongside captions mocking her behavior. Local journalists soon picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of racial profiling in predominantly white spaces. When questioned by reporters, Karen issued a public apology, claiming she hadn't intended to cause harm and insisting she was merely following protocol. But few were willing to accept her explanation, especially given the optics of the situation. In the weeks that followed, calls for Karen's removal from the HOA board gained momentum. Residents demanded accountability, arguing that her actions reflected poorly on the entire community. While some defended her, citing her dedication to maintaining order, the majority agreed that her behavior crossed a line. For Karen, the fight served as a harsh reckoning, a reminder that wielding power without empathy can lead to consequences far beyond what one might anticipate. For Senator Carter, the incident reinforced her commitment to addressing systemic inequities wherever they arose. She used the platform afforded by the media coverage to highlight broader issues of discrimination and bias, urging communities to engage in honest conversations about race and privilege. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of education and empathy, encouraging individuals to challenge their own assumptions and strive for inclusivity. Ultimately, the confrontation at Willow Creek Estates became more than just a local scandal. It evolved into a catalyst for change. It sparked discussions not only within the gated community itself, but also across the nation, reminding everyone involved of the urgent need to dismantle barriers that perpetuate inequality. And for Senator Andre Carter, it underscored the ongoing fight for a world where everyone feels truly at home, regardless of where they live or who they are. The confrontation at Willow Creek Estates had reached its boiling point. Senator Andre Carter's calm yet firm response to Karen's accusations left the entire scene suspended in a moment of stark clarity. As she rose from her lounge chair, her movements deliberate and unhurried, it was as though time slowed down around her. The sun glinted off her sunglasses as she slipped them onto her face, shielding her eyes but not her piercing gaze. Every step she took radiated authority, not the kind imposed by titles or positions, but the quiet confidence of someone who has faced countless battles and emerged stronger each time. Addressing both the officers and the growing crowd of onlookers, Senator Carter chose her words carefully. "Let me make one thing clear," she began, her voice steady and commanding without raising above a conversational tone. Her demeanor demanded attention. There was no room for interruption, no space for argument. She continued, "No one should ever feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own home because of the color of their skin." Her statement landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the assembled neighbors. Some flinched visibly, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. For many, these words struck a nerve they hadn't realized existed, or perhaps didn't want to acknowledge. Senator Carter wasn't just speaking about herself. She was addressing the systemic biases that underpinned communities like Willow Creek Estates. These were places where exclusivity often masqueraded as safety, where unspoken rules governed who belonged and who didn't. And now, those rules, and the prejudices behind them, were being laid bare for everyone to see. Karen, still reeling from the revelation of Senator Carter's identity, stood frozen nearby. Her clipboard lay forgotten on the ground, a symbol of her shattered sense of authority. Panic flickered across her face as she scrambled to salvage the situation. Stammering, she tried to explain herself. I was just doing my job. You didn't provide any proof earlier, so I assumed. Her voice trailed off, faltering under the weight of Senator Carter's unwavering gaze. You assumed wrong, Senator Carter interjected sharply, cutting off Karen mid-sentence. There was no anger in her tone, only a resolute firmness that left no room for excuses. And your assumptions caused harm. That's something we all need to reflect on, not just here, but across the country. These final words hung heavily in the air, lingering long after she finished speaking. They carried a universal truth, one that resonated deeply with some listeners and made others squirm uncomfortably. In that moment, the divide between two worlds became painfully apparent. The world of privilege, where assumptions are made freely and consequences rarely considered, and the world of lived experience, where such assumptions can lead to humiliation, fear, and even danger. As Senator Carter gathered her belongings and walked away, the remaining residents were left to grapple with what had just transpired. Neighbors who had initially gathered out of idle curiosity now found themselves confronted with uncomfortable questions. What role had they played in allowing this incident to escalate? Why hadn't anyone stepped forward to challenge Karen when she first accused Senator Carter? The silence that followed her departure spoke volumes. A mix of guilt, shame, and unease settled over the crowd. For Karen, the confrontation was nothing short of devastating. Once confident in her position as the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's standards, she now stood isolated, her actions exposed for all to judge. The clipboard she'd once wielded as a badge of authority now felt like a millstone around her neck. Her attempt to defend herself fell flat, drowned out by the collective disapproval of those around her. Even the officers, who had initially treated her with polite professionalism, now seemed distant, their expressions unreadable but tinged with disappointment. In the days that followed, the fallout from the incident dominated conversations throughout the neighborhood. Social media amplified the story, turning it into a local sensation. Photos of Karen pointing accusingly at Senator Carter circulated widely, accompanied by mocking captions and hashtags that highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of racial profiling in predominantly white spaces. Journalists interviewed residents, many of whom expressed embarrassment and frustration over how the community had handled the situation. Karen issued a public apology, claiming she hadn't intended to cause harm and insisting she was simply following protocol. But her words rang hollow to most. The optics of the situation were damning. A middle-aged white woman calling the police on a black state senator in her own community pool. It was a scenario that echoed far too many similar incidents across the country, each one underscoring the deep-seated biases that continue to plague society. Calls for Karen's removal from the HOA board gained significant traction. Petitions circulated online, garnering hundreds of signatures from both residents and outsiders who viewed her behavior as emblematic of larger issues within gated communities. While a small faction defended her, citing her dedication to maintaining order, the majority agreed that her actions crossed a line. For Karen, the backlash served as a harsh reckoning, a reminder that wielding power without empathy can have consequences far beyond what one might anticipate. Meanwhile, Senator Carter seized the opportunity to spark broader discussions about discrimination and privilege. She gave interviews to local and national media outlets, using the platform to highlight the systemic inequities that persist in communities like Willow Creek Estates. In these interviews, she emphasized the importance of education and empathy, urging individuals to challenge their own assumptions and strive for inclusivity. Her message resonated deeply with many, inspiring conversations not only within Willow Creek, but also across the nation. For some residents, the incident prompted genuine reflection. They began questioning the unspoken rules and cultural norms that governed their community. Was the emphasis on exclusivity truly about safety, or was it rooted in something more insidious? Could they create a space where diversity was celebrated rather than feared? Slowly but surely, seeds of change began to take root. Others, however, remained resistant to introspection. They dismissed the incident as an isolated event, refusing to acknowledge the deeper implications of Karen's actions. To them, Senator Carter's presence was an anomaly, an exception rather than the rule. This denial only underscored the challenges ahead, reminding everyone that progress is rarely linear or universally embraced. Ultimately, the confrontation at Willow Creek Estates became more than just a local scandal. It evolved into a catalyst for change. It forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. It sparked discussions about race, privilege, and belonging that extended far beyond the confines of the gated neighborhood. And for Senator Andrea Carter, it reinforced her resolve to continue fighting for a world where everyone feels truly at home, regardless of where they live or who they are. Through confrontation and reflection, the residents of Willow Creek Estates, and countless others who followed the story, were reminded of the urgent need to dismantle barriers that perpetuate inequality. It was a lesson that would linger long after the headlines faded, shaping the way people thought about justice, fairness, and humanity itself. The aftermath of the confrontation at Willow Creek Estates rippled outward, touching lives far beyond the confines of the gated community. What began as a tense standoff between Karen and Senator Andrea Carter quickly escalated into a national conversation about race, privilege, and systemic bias. As the dust settled, the residents of Willow Creek and the wider public were left to grapple with the implications of what had transpired. The incident served as both a mirror reflecting societal flaws and a catalyst for meaningful change. For Karen Thompson, life in Willow Creek Estates would never be the same. Once revered, or at least tolerated, as the hyper-vigilant enforcer of HOA rules, she now faced widespread condemnation. Her actions on that fateful afternoon were dissected endlessly in online forums, social media threads, and local news segments. Photos of her pointing accusingly at Senator Carter went viral, accompanied by captions like "Karen strikes again" and hashtags such as #Poolgate. Memes mocking her behavior flooded the internet, turning her into an unwitting symbol of racial insensitivity. Calls for her removal from the HOA board grew louder, fueled by petitions signed not only by residents, but also by outsiders who saw her conduct as emblematic of broader issues within privileged communities. At a heated HOA meeting held shortly after the incident, several neighbors stood up to voice their dissatisfaction. One resident, visibly emotional, accused Karen of tarnishing the community's reputation. Another pointedly remarked, "This isn't just about one bad decision. It's about years of microaggressions and exclusionary practices under your leadership." Despite issuing a public apology, Karen struggled to regain any semblance of credibility. Her statement, which claimed she didn't mean to cause harm and was merely enforcing the rules, fell flat for most observers. To many, it sounded defensive and self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. Even those who initially defended her began to distance themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with racism and overreach. In the weeks that followed, Karen withdrew from public view. She resigned quietly from her position on the HOA board, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the real motivation behind her departure. Neighbors reported seeing her blinds drawn and her mailbox overflowing, a sign, perhaps, of the isolation she now faced. While some pitied her downfall, others felt it was a necessary reckoning. After all, her actions had exposed deep-seated biases that could no longer be ignored or excused. For Senator Andrea Carter, the incident became an opportunity to amplify her advocacy work. Rather than seeking revenge or dwelling on the indignity of being questioned in her own home, she channeled the attention into productive dialogue. In interviews with major news outlets, she framed the altercation not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger pattern of discrimination faced by Black Americans in predominantly white spaces. "I've been stopped in my own driveway before," she revealed during one televised interview. "I've been asked to show ID while picking up my kids from school. These experiences are exhausting, demoralizing, and unfortunately, all too common. But they're also opportunities to educate others, to hold up a mirror and say, this is what bias looks like." Her eloquence and composure earned widespread praise, further solidifying her status as a respected leader. Social media users rallied around her, using hashtags like #StandWithSenator to express solidarity. Community organizations invited her to speak at events focused on racial equity and inclusion, where she shared insights gleaned from decades of navigating systems designed to exclude people who look like her. Her message was clear: change begins with accountability, empathy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Within Willow Creek Estates itself, Senator Carter took steps to foster healing and understanding. She hosted a town hall meeting open to all residents, encouraging them to share their thoughts and concerns about diversity and belonging in the community. The turnout was impressive, with attendees ranging from longtime homeowners to newer residents eager to contribute to positive change. During the meeting, Senator Carter emphasized the importance of creating spaces where everyone feels welcome, not through performative gestures, but through genuine effort and policy changes. She proposed initiatives aimed at increasing inclusivity, such as hosting cultural exchange programs, revising HOA guidelines to eliminate discriminatory language, and establishing a diversity committee to oversee progress. Many residents embraced these ideas, recognizing them as long overdue steps toward building a more equitable community. Others remained hesitant, clinging to old habits and fears, but even they couldn't deny the momentum shifting in favor of reform. The incident forced Willow Creek Estates to confront its own identity. For years, the neighborhood had prided itself on exclusivity, framing its strict regulations as measures to preserve quality of life. But the confrontation at the pool revealed a darker side, a culture of gatekeeping that prioritized conformity over compassion. Residents began asking difficult questions about what kind of community they wanted to be. Did they value uniformity above all else, or were they willing to embrace diversity and complexity? Some neighbors emerged as vocal advocates for change. They organized book clubs centered on anti-racism literature, attended workshops on implicit bias, and encouraged open discussions about privilege and power dynamics. A group of parents launched a mentorship program connecting children from different backgrounds, fostering friendships that transcended racial and socioeconomic divides. Slowly but surely, the fabric of the community began to shift. Not everyone welcomed these efforts, however. A vocal minority clung to the belief that nothing was wrong with the way things had always been. They dismissed calls for inclusivity as unnecessary meddling, arguing that incidents like the pool confrontation were rare exceptions rather than symptoms of deeper problems. This resistance highlighted the challenges of achieving meaningful transformation, reminding everyone that progress often requires patience and persistence. Beyond Willow Creek Estates, the story resonated deeply with audiences across the country. It tapped into a growing awareness of racial profiling and systemic inequities, sparking conversations in households workplaces, and classrooms. Journalists drew parallels between this incident and other high-profile cases involving Black individuals being targeted in spaces they rightfully belonged to, from BBQ Becky to Permit Potty. Each story underscored the pervasive nature of racial bias and the urgent need for education and accountability. Social media played a pivotal role in amplifying the message. Hashtags related to the incident trended nationwide, prompting users to share their own experiences of exclusion and discrimination. Many expressed gratitude for Senator Carter's grace and resilience, praising her for turning a potentially humiliating moment into an opportunity for growth. Others used the platform to call out similar behaviors in their own communities, demanding action from local leaders and institutions. Corporate America took notice as well. Companies with ties to Willow Creek Estates, including real estate firms and property management companies, issued statements reaffirming their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Some went so far as to review their hiring practices and customer service protocols to ensure they aligned with principles of equity and respect. The ripple effect demonstrated how individual actions can inspire institutional change. At its core, the incident at Willow Creek Estates offered several critical lessons. Assumptions have consequences. Karen's snap judgment based on appearance and preconceived notions led to a humiliating situation for herself and a violation of rights for Senator Carter. It underscored the dangers of making assumptions without evidence and the harm caused when biases go unchecked. Privilege shapes perception. The ease with which Karen wielded authority, and the assumption that her word would carry weight over a Black woman's, highlighted the privileges afforded to certain groups in society. Recognizing and addressing these disparities is essential for fostering equality. Accountability matters. The swift backlash against Karen showed that accountability is crucial for driving change. Whether through public pressure or institutional policies, holding individuals responsible for discriminatory behavior sends a powerful message that such actions will not be tolerated. Ultimately, the confrontation at Willow Creek Estates became more than just a local scandal. It evolved into a catalyst for reflection and reform. For Karen, it was a humbling lesson in the limits of unchecked power and the cost of prejudice. For Senator Carter, it was an affirmation of her mission to challenge systemic inequities and inspire change. And for the community, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that true belonging requires more than lip service. It demands action, empathy, and a willingness to grow.